There's a special kind of silence that falls over a first-class cabin when an unspoken social line is obliterated. It's the sound of collective breath-holding as unhinged, blind entitlement meets an immovable wall of absolute authority. When a wealthy, arrogant passenger decided a quiet black woman didn't belong in the luxury seat next to him, he thought he was just flexing his everyday power. He snapped his fingers. He demanded she be moved to the back. He threatened the flight crew's jobs. What he didn't know was that he wasn't just barking orders at a fellow passenger, he was actively dismantling his own empire. He had just picked a fight with the one woman who held the fate of his entire industry in her hands. This is the story of a cross-country flight where unchecked arrogance met a devastating, real-life reality check. Flight 405 from New York's JFK International to Los Angeles was boarding out of Terminal 4, enveloped in the chaotic hum typical of a Friday evening. Outside, rain lashed against the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, delaying departures and fraying nerves. Inside the exclusive first-class lounge, however, the atmosphere was a sanctuary of hushed voices, clinking crystal, and soft jazz. Dr. Victoria Sterling sat in a corner armchair, sipping sparkling water and reviewing a thick, red-tabbed dossier. Victoria, a woman in her late 40s with a sharp, tailored navy blazer and her hair pulled back into an elegant, no-nonsense knot, had just finished a grueling 7-2-hour summit in Washington. 6 months ago, she had been appointed as the executive director of the National Aviation Oversight Board, NAOB, the highest regulatory authority governing domestic airspace, airline compliance, and commercial aviation contracts. It was a job that required an iron will, and Victoria had spent her entire career in aerospace engineering and policy, proving she was made of titanium. She closed her dossier, the gold lettering on the cover gleaming under the lounge lights, and slipped it into her leather briefcase. It was time to board. Victoria preferred to board early. She liked the quiet moments before the cabin filled, taking the time to observe the crew. As the head of the aviation board, she never traveled under an alias, but she rarely announced her title. To the gate agents and flight attendants, she was just a VIP passenger in Seat 2A, a window seat on the Boeing 757. She settled into the wide, plush leather seat, adjusting her tray table and placing a noise-canceling headset around her neck. She offered a warm, polite smile to the passing flight attendant, a young woman named Chloe, who offered her a pre-departure beverage. "Just water with lemon, please, Chloe." "Thank you," Victoria said, her voice smooth and grounded. 15 minutes later, the peace of the cabin was shattered. Striding down the jet bridge with the heavy, aggressive steps of a man who believed the world was late for his schedule, came Bradley Covington. Bradley was the CEO of Covington Global Freight, a massive logistics company that utilized commercial airlines to ship millions of dollars in cargo daily. He was 50-something, flushed in the face, wearing a bespoke gray suit that cost more than the flight attendants made in a year, and loudly barking into a Bluetooth earpiece. "I don't care what the union says, fire them," Bradley shouted, ignoring the greeting of the lead purser, Nathan, stationed at the aircraft door. "If the shipment isn't in Seattle by Tuesday, I'm gutting the entire regional management team. Just do it." He pushed past a slower passenger, an elderly man with a cane, without so much as a glance downward. Bradley was used to people moving out of his way. He existed in an echo chamber of wealth and compliance, where his demands were met before they fully left his mouth. As he stepped into the first-class cabin, he stopped in the aisle to shrug off his tailored overcoat, expecting a flight attendant to materialize instantly to take it. When Nathan stepped forward a second too late, Bradley shoved the coat into the purser's chest. "Careful with that, it's cashmere," he snapped, ending his phone call with a sharp tap to his ear. Bradley looked down at his boarding pass, then up at row 2. He saw the empty aisle seat, 2B. Then, he saw the person occupying the window seat, 2A. Victoria didn't look up from the regulatory report she had reopened on her lap. She had felt his chaotic energy the moment he boarded, but she had spent 30 years in corporate boardrooms dealing with men exactly like him. She remained perfectly still, her focus seemingly entirely on the paperwork. Bradley's eyes narrowed. He looked at his ticket again, let out a loud, exaggerated sigh of disbelief, and aggressively tossed his expensive leather briefcase into the overhead bin, letting the lid slam shut with a resounding bang that made several passengers jump. The stage was set, and the tension in the cabin instantly spiked. Bradley did not sit down immediately. Instead, he stood in the aisle, looming over Victoria. He crossed his arms, his face twisting into a scowl of deep offense. He looked her up and down, taking in her understated appearance, the lack of flashy designer logos, the simple elegance of her demeanor, and made a series of snap, wildly inaccurate judgments. "Excuse me," Bradley said. His voice wasn't just loud, it carried the specific frequency of a man accustomed to dressing down subordinates. Victoria finished reading the paragraph in front of her, calmly placed a silver bookmark on the page, and slowly turned her head. She looked up at him with dark, piercing eyes that offered absolutely no submission. "Yes? I think you're in the wrong seat," Bradley stated, waving his boarding pass vaguely in her direction. "This is first class. Row 2. Victoria didn't flinch. "I am aware of where we are, and I am in 2A. As assigned." Bradley offered a patronizing, tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Look, I fly this route twice a week. I know these seats. Sometimes the gate agents get confused and upgrade people from standby or economy without checking the manifest properly. I need to get to work, and I need the window seat. So, if you could just gather your things." He actually reached his hand down, making a sweeping, shooing motion toward the aisle, fully expecting her to scramble out of his way. "I am not a standby passenger," Victoria replied, her tone dropping a fraction of an octave, chilling the air between them. "And 2A is my confirmed seat. Your seat appears to be 2B. I suggest you sit down, as the captain has just turned on the seatbelt sign." Bradley's face flushed a deeper shade of crimson. The audacity of this woman refusing him was completely foreign. He turned his head and snapped his fingers sharply in the air. "Stewardess! Hey, get over here." Chloe, the flight attendant, rushed over, her professional smile firmly in place despite the obvious tension. "How can I help you, sir?" "There's been a mistake," Bradley said, pointing a rigid finger at Victoria. "This woman is sitting in my row. I specifically requested a solo arrangement, or at least someone who fits the profile of a premium cabin. I have highly sensitive corporate documents to review. I cannot have someone looking over my shoulder." The implication was clear, heavy, and dripping with prejudice. Several passengers in row 1 and row 3 turned their heads. A wealthy tech executive in 1B lowered his newspaper, his eyebrows raised. Chloe swallowed hard, maintaining her composure. "Sir, I can assure you there is no mistake. This is a fully booked flight due to the weather delays. Doctor, Sterling is confirmed in seat 2A. Your assigned seat is 2B. I am not sitting next to her," Bradley stated, raising his voice so the entire cabin could hear. "I paid $5,000 for this ticket. I am a Platinum Elite Medallion member. I want her moved. Put her back in coach where she belongs, or bump someone else. I don't care how you do it, just get her out of my space." Victoria slowly uncrossed her legs and leaned forward, resting her hands on her dossier. She looked at Bradley, not with anger, but with the cold, clinical fascination of a scientist observing a particularly volatile insect. "You want me moved to coach?" Victoria repeated softly. It wasn't a question, it was a recording of a fact for later use. "That's right," Bradley sneered, mistaking her calm for capitulation. "Nothing personal, but business is business, and I need the space. You understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Victoria murmured, pulling a sleek silver pen from her pocket and jotting a quick note in the margins of her dossier. Chloe, looking distressed, tried to intervene again. "Sir, I cannot ask a ticketed first-class passenger to move to the main cabin. It's against airline policy, and it's illegal. If you are unhappy with your seat, you are welcome to take a later flight." "I am not taking a later flight," Bradley exploded, slamming his hand on the back of the seat in front of him. "Do you have any idea who I am? Get me the purser." Now, within seconds, Nathan, the senior purser, arrived at row 2. Nathan was a 20-year veteran of the airline, a man who had diffused brawls, medical emergencies, and celebrity meltdowns. He stepped between Bradley and the seated Victoria, creating a physical barrier. "Sir, I am the lead flight attendant. My name is Nathan. Please lower your voice." "What seems to be the issue?" "The issue," Bradley spat, leaning in close to Nathan's face, "is that your incompetent staff is refusing to accommodate my very simple request. I am Bradley Covington. CEO of Covington Global Freight. I want this woman moved immediately. She's making me uncomfortable, and I refuse to sit next to her. Nathan glanced at Victoria. Victoria offered a microscopic shake of her head, a silent signal that meant let him dig. Mr. Covington, Nathan said firmly, his customer service smile vanishing. Dr. Sterling is a valued passenger. We do not relocate passengers based on another passenger's personal preferences or discomfort unless there is a safety issue. Your behavior, however, is beginning to border on a safety issue. I need you to take your seat in 2B immediately, or we will return to the gate and offload you. The threat of being kicked off the flight seemed to short-circuit Bradley's brain. For a second, he stood frozen in sheer outrage. Then, a dark, vindictive smirk spread across his face. He leaned in closer to Nathan, lowering his voice into a menacing growl, but perfectly audible to Victoria. You really want to play this game with me, pal? Bradley whispered harshly. My company ships 300 tons of cargo on your airline's commercial bellies every single week. We just submitted a bid to renew our exclusive logistics contract with this carrier. A contract worth $50 million. If you don't move her right now, I will personally call the VP of Operations before we take off. I will have you fired. I will have this little girl, he gestured dismissively at Chloe, fired. And I will pull my freight contract so fast, it will make your CEO's head spin. Nathan's jaw tightened. Dealing with entitled passengers was one thing. Dealing with corporate blackmail was another. Before Nathan could respond, Victoria spoke up. Her voice cut through the heavy, hostile air like a scalpel. Mr. Covington, Victoria said, her tone deceptively polite. You are the Chief Executive Officer of Covington Global Freight? Bradley turned his glare back to her, puffing his chest out. That's right. So you finally understand who you're dealing with. Move. And you currently utilize commercial passenger flights to transport your Class 3 cargo? She pressed, her pen hovering over her paper. Bradley frowned, thrown off by the specific, technical terminology. Yes. We use commercial bellies. It's standard industry practice. Not that it's any of your business. And you are threatening to leverage your corporate shipping contracts to force an airline crew to violate Title 49 of the United States Code regarding passenger discrimination? She asked, her eyes locking onto his. Bradley laughed a harsh, barking sound. Title 49? What are you, a lawyer? Listen, lady, I don't care about regulations. I make the rules. The fine they'd pay for moving you is pennies compared to what I pay them. Money talks. You walk. Now get up. Victoria didn't move. Instead, she slowly closed her dossier. She looked up at Nathan, the purser, who was watching her with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Nathan, Victoria said, her voice echoing with the sudden weight of undeniable authority. Please inform Captain Miller that we have a security and compliance issue in row 2. Tell him that Dr. Victoria Sterling requires his presence before we push back from the gate. Bradley rolled his eyes dramatically. Oh, please. You're calling the pilot? What's he gonna do, arrest me? Victoria finally allowed a small, razor-sharp smile to touch her lips. She leaned back in her seat and looked directly into Bradley's arrogant eyes. No, Mr. Covington. The captain isn't going to arrest you, Victoria said softly, the silence in the cabin hanging on her every word. But as the executive director of the National Aviation Oversight Board, I am officially opening an immediate investigation into Covington Global Freight's regulatory compliance, safety protocols, and corporate extortion tactics. And until that investigation is concluded, I am suspending your company's clearance to load so much as a shoebox onto any commercial aircraft in the United States. Bradley's smirk vanished, the color drained from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of pale gray. The silence in the cabin was so absolute, you could hear the rain hitting the fuselage outside. Karma had boarded the flight, and she had the window seat. For exactly 10 seconds, the first-class cabin of Flight 405 existed in a vacuum. It was a profound, suffocating stillness where the oxygen seemed to have been violently sucked from the room. Outside, the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the Boeing 757's fuselage sounded suddenly deafening. Bradley Covington stood frozen in the aisle, his hand still gripping the leather of the seatback in front of him. His brain, accustomed to processing multi-million-dollar logistics algorithms, was currently crashing. The words National Aviation Oversight Board echoed in his head, entirely incompatible with the reality he thought he was controlling. The NAOB? Bradley stammered, his voice losing its booming, aggressive resonance, replaced by a thin, reedy squeak. He looked around the cabin, making eye contact with the tech executive in 1B, hoping for some shared camaraderie, a knowing smirk that this was all an elaborate prank. The executive merely raised a single, judgmental eyebrow and took a slow sip of his champagne, enjoying the show. "That's impossible," Bradley finally managed, forcing a harsh, hollow laugh that fooled absolutely no one. The color was rapidly draining from his neck, leaving his skin a sickly, mottled gray. "You're lying. You're just some passenger trying to make a scene. The head of the NAOB doesn't fly commercial. She certainly doesn't sit quietly while being spoken to." Victoria did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. True power never has to shout to be heard. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her tailored blazer. Bradley flinched, a microscopic step backward, as if she were drawing a weapon. Instead, she retrieved a slim, dark leather wallet. With a flick of her wrist, she flipped it open and held it up. There, gleaming under the warm overhead reading light, was a heavy, gold and enamel federal badge. Next to it, an identification card bearing the seal of the United States government, a severe photograph of Victoria, and the bold, undeniable title, Executive Director, National Aviation Oversight Board. "I assure you, Mr. Covington," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly soft, conversational volume, "I am entirely real. And I assure you, I fly commercial quite often. It is, after all, the most effective way to observe the actual operational integrity of the airlines my agency regulates. And, quite frankly, to observe the behavior of the corporate partners who utilize them." Bradley stared at the badge as if it were radioactive. His mouth opened and closed silently. A fish pulled abruptly onto the dock. The aggressive posture, the puffed-out chest, the absolute certainty of his own superiority, it all evaporated, leaving behind a desperately panicked middle-aged man who had just realized he had walked barefoot into a minefield. At that moment, the cockpit door clicked open. Captain Miller, a silver-haired veteran with 4 stripes on his shoulders and a posture carved from military discipline, stepped into the galley area. He took one look at the frozen tableau, Nathan standing rigidly, Chloe looking terrified but vindicated, Bradley hovering in the aisle like a ghost, and Victoria calmly holding up a federal badge. "Nathan," Captain Miller said, his deep voice cutting through the tension. "Ground control is asking if we're ready for pushback. What is the holdup in my cabin?" Nathan cleared his throat, standing a little taller. "Captain, we have a situation in row 2. Mr. Covington here," he gestured to Bradley, was refusing to take his assigned seat and was threatening the flight crew's jobs, as well as threatening to leverage his company's commercial freight contracts against the airline if we didn't forcibly relocate the passenger in 2A. Captain Miller's eyes hardened. Threatening his crew was the fastest way to earn a one-way ticket back to the terminal. He turned his gaze to 2A. Victoria snapped her wallet shut and tucked it away. "Captain Miller. I am Dr. Victoria Sterling, Executive Director of the NAOB." Captain Miller's eyebrows shot up. Every pilot in the country knew who Victoria Sterling was. She was the one who had recently grounded an entire fleet of regional jets after discovering falsified maintenance logs. She was an absolute terror to negligent airline executives and a guardian angel to pilots and crews who valued safety over profit. "Dr. Sterling," Captain Miller said, immediately stepping forward and offering a respectful nod. "It is an absolute honor to have you aboard, ma'am. Though I deeply apologize for the disturbance." "The disturbance is not your fault, Captain," Victoria replied smoothly. "However, it has highlighted a severe compliance vulnerability regarding Covington Global Freight. Mr. Covington has just admitted, in front of a dozen witnesses, to attempting to use his commercial shipping contracts to extort your crew into violating federal passenger discrimination laws." Bradley finally found his voice. It was frantic, dripping with the sudden, sharp, metallic taste of fear. "Captain, listen to me. This is a misunderstanding. I was stressed. I have a major merger happening in Seattle. I haven't slept. I just wanted a window seat. She's overreacting." "I don't overreact, Mr. Covington," Victoria said smoothly. "I regulate." The true horror of Bradley Covington's situation had not yet fully materialized in his mind. In the heavily fortified bunker of his corporate ego, he still believed in the invincible power of his net worth. He existed in a world where every mistake had a price tag, and every offense could be smoothed over with a settlement or a high-level phone call. He honestly believed that an apology, perhaps a stiff, insincere one, coupled with a few strategic favors for the airline's executive board, could sweep this unfortunate misunderstanding under the rug. He had no idea how precisely or how ruthlessly Dr. Victoria Sterling operated. To her, he wasn't just a rude passenger, he was a systemic failure in human form. The silence in the first-class cabin was no longer just quiet, it was pressurized. It felt as though the cabin altitude had suddenly spiked, making it hard for the onlookers to draw a full breath. The tech executive in 1B had completely lowered his newspaper, his eyes darting between Victoria's calm, resolute face and Bradley's rapidly deteriorating composure. Victoria picked up her smartphone from the tray table with a steady hand. She didn't scroll through a contact list or search for a name. She simply tapped a single speed dial icon. In the hushed cabin, the faint, rhythmic brr-brr of the outgoing ringtone was audible to everyone within 3 rows. It was the sound of a guillotine blade being hoisted into position. "David," Victoria said the moment the line connected. Her voice was a masterpiece of professional detachment. It was cold, brisk, and entirely devoid of the heat of anger. "It's Victoria. I'm currently on Delta 405 at JFK. I need you to initiate a Code Red compliance hold, system-wide. Effective immediately." Bradley's breath hitched, a sharp, ragged sound that caught in his throat. "Wait, what are you doing?" he hissed, his voice cracking. He took a frantic step forward, his hand reaching out as if to swat the phone away, but Nathan moved with the practiced speed of a man half his age. The purser placed a firm, immovable hand on Bradley's chest, physically checking his momentum. "Stay back, sir," Nathan commanded, his voice vibrating with a new, emboldened authority. Victoria didn't even blink at the interruption. She continued into the phone, her gaze fixed on a point on the bulkhead, looking through Bradley as if he were made of glass. "Yes, David. Immediately. Target entity, Covington Global Freight. I want an immediate halt on all Class 3 commercial belly cargo originating from their manifests. Inform the FAA, the TSA's Cargo Oversight Division, and all domestic carrier operations centers. Cite suspected exertion of undue influence on flight crews, potential safety compromise, and attempted corporate extortion. No Covington freight goes airborne, not on a passenger jet, not on a puddle jumper, until my office conducts a full, top-to-bottom forensic audit of their logistics contracts and safety protocols." She paused for a heartbeat, listening to her deputy director on the other end. The cabin was so silent you could hear the rain lashing against the fuselage, a frantic drumming that matched the rhythm of Bradley's heart. "Yes, David," Victoria confirmed, her silver pen tapping rhythmically against her dossier. "Ground it all. Every single pallet from Newark to LAX. I want their entire supply chain frozen at the tarmac. I'll formally sign the emergency directives the moment we land in Los Angeles. Thank you." She ended the call with a deliberate tap and placed the phone face down on the leather-bound dossier. The clack of the phone hitting the tray table sounded like a gavel. "You can't do that," Bradley whispered. The booming, resonant voice of the CEO was gone, replaced by a thin, trembling reed of a sound. He looked at Captain Miller, his eyes wide and pleading. "Captain, tell her she can't do that. That's illegal. That's an abuse of power. She's halting millions of dollars of commerce over a seat dispute. This is a private company. You can't just stop the economy because your feelings were hurt." "Mr. Covington," Captain Miller said, his voice dropping into a register of absolute, unyielding gravity. He stepped closer, his presence filling the aisle. "Dr. Sterling is the head of the federal agency that regulates every square inch of the airspace I fly in. She has the statutory authority to ground an airline, let alone a freight contractor, if she deems there is a threat to the integrity of the system. And frankly, sir, considering you just threatened my purser and my flight attendant with their livelihoods in an attempt to subvert airline policy, I'd say she's being remarkably restrained." Buzz, buzz, buzz. The sound came from Bradley's bespoke suit jacket. It was a sharp, aggressive vibration, the haptic feedback of a crumbling empire. He mechanically reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen was a blinding white glare in the dim cabin light. It was a text from Richard. his chief operating officer. Brad, pick up, now. Delta just pulled our loading clearance in Atlanta. They're saying we're on a federal no-fly for cargo. What is happening? Before Bradley could even process the words, the phone buzzed again. And again. A cascade of notifications began to scroll down the screen like a digital landslide. Then, the phone started ringing, the harsh, shrill default ringtone tearing through the silence. The caller ID read, Bancroft Pharmaceuticals, V.P. Logistics. This was Bradley's largest client, a multi-billion-dollar account that relied on Covington Global Freight to move time-sensitive, temperature-controlled medical supplies across the country. If those shipments sat on a hot tarmac for even 4 hours, the cargo would be ruined. With shaking hands, Bradley answered. He didn't even have the strength to put the phone to his ear properly. He held it a few inches away, his thumb white-knuckled against the glass. Hello? The voice on the other end was not speaking. It was screaming. Even from seat 2A, Victoria could hear the faint, metallic rasp of a man in a total panic. Bradley, what the hell is going on? The VP raged. I just got a call from our dispatch at O'Hare. American Airlines just kicked our entire oncology shipment off the plane. They said there's a federal code red on all Covington manifests. My team is telling me we're grounded nationwide. We have patients waiting for these doses, Bradley. Do you have any idea what the liability is on this? If this isn't resolved in the next hour, we are pulling the contract and filing for a full breach of service. I'll have your head for this. The line went dead with a definitive electronic beep. Bradley's knees literally buckled. He swayed, catching himself on the edge of the seat in 2C. The phone slipped from his fingers, bouncing off the carpeted floor with a dull thud. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with the kind of pure, unadulterated terror usually reserved for people watching a natural disaster approach their front door. The arrogant, untouchable CEO who had stormed onto the plane demanding the world bow to his whims was gone. In his place was a broken man watching 20 years of work incinerate in real time. He turned toward Victoria. The sneer was gone. The posture of a king was gone. He looked like he was about to collapse into the aisle and beg for mercy. Dr. Sterling, Bradley choked out, his voice cracking on every syllable. Please. I'm sorry. I was out of line. I was terribly, horribly out of line. I haven't slept. I'm under immense pressure with the merger. I didn't mean those things about the crew. Please, you can't do this. That hold. It will bankrupt us by Monday morning. Our clients will jump ship. My board will. They'll destroy me. Please, I'll sit in the back. I'll sit in the jump seat. I'll apologize to everyone. Just call your office back. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them the compliance is fine. Victoria looked up at him. There was no pity in her eyes, nor was there the petty, vindictive glee Bradley expected. There was only the cold, unyielding wall of consequence. She looked at him the way a judge looks at a defendant who has already been found guilty by a jury of his own actions. Mr. Covington, she said, her voice perfectly even and terrifyingly calm. You stated earlier that you don't care about regulations. You stated that you make the rules because money talks. What you failed to realize is that in this airspace, money is a secondary concern. Safety, integrity, and regulatory compliance are the only currencies that matter. Your profound lack of judgment today, your willingness to use your corporate weight to bully a flight crew into violating federal law, indicates a systemic, cultural failure in your company's leadership. If you act this way in public, I shudder to think what safety corners you are cutting in private. The audit will proceed. It will be thorough. And it will be final. Bradley let out a pathetic, stifled sob, a sound that made the other passengers look away in a mix of pity and secondary embarrassment. He reached a hand out toward her, a desperate, begging gesture that Nathan quickly intercepted. Please, Bradley whispered, a single tear tracking down his flushed face. Captain Miller stepped in, his hand landing on Bradley's shoulder with the weight of a closing cell door. That's enough, the captain said. Mr. Covington, your presence on this flight is no longer a matter of seat assignments. You have become a disruption to the order of this aircraft, and your behavior towards my crew is a security risk. I am exercising my authority as pilot in command. You are no longer welcome on this aircraft. Gather your belongings. Now, Nathan will escort you to the gate. Bradley looked wildly at the captain, then at Nathan, and finally at Chloe. The young flight attendant he had tried to have fired just 10 minutes ago was standing by the galley curtain. She wasn't laughing. She was standing tall, her chin raised, watching him with a quiet, somber dignity that made his previous behavior look even more small and pathetic. "You're kicking me off?" Bradley whispered, the reality of the public shaming finally sinking in. "Yes, sir, I am," Captain Miller replied, his voice echoing through the cabin. "Now move, before I have Port Authority come down that jet bridge to assist you." The king of logistics began to move, but he wasn't walking. He was retreating, and as he reached for his bag, the entire cabin watched in a silence so thick it felt like history being written in real time. The command from Captain Miller hung in the pressurized air of the first-class cabin, absolute, irreversible, and as heavy as a lead weight. Now move. For Bradley Covington, the 50-something titan of corporate logistics, who had spent the last 2 decades firing loyal employees via brief emails and bullying industry competitors into quiet submission, the physical reality of being formally expelled from a commercial aircraft was entirely incomprehensible. His brain, so accustomed to dictating the terms of every room he entered, violently struggled to process the sheer, humiliating mechanics of his sudden defeat. He stood frozen in the narrow aisle, his hand gripping the premium leather of the seatback in front of him so tightly his knuckles had turned stark white. The sudden rush of adrenaline had abandoned him, leaving behind a cold, hollow vacuum in his chest. He looked down at his own trembling hands, then up toward the sleek overhead bin where he had aggressively, loudly slammed his briefcase just 20 short minutes prior. He felt a bead of cold sweat trace its way down his spine, soaking into the collar of his bespoke Italian shirt. The tailored gray suit he wore, once a uniform of his undeniable dominance, suddenly felt suffocating, sagging on a frame that seemed to have shrunk 3 sizes in the span of a single conversation. Nathan, the senior purser, did not wait for Bradley to find his dignity. He didn't offer a moment of grace for the CEO to collect himself. With the practiced, surgically precise, and utterly devoid of sympathy efficiency of a veteran flight attendant who had just been granted ultimate authority over an unruly passenger, Nathan stepped forward. He reached up, unlatched the overhead bin with a sharp, resounding click, and pulled down Bradley's heavy, monogrammed leather briefcase. He turned and held it out, forcing Bradley to take it. "Your bag, Mr. Covington," Nathan said. His voice was flat, perfectly professional, yet deliberately projected loud enough for every single passenger in the first-class cabin to hear with crystal clarity. "Please gather your overcoat. The gate agent is waiting for you at the top of the jet bridge." Bradley flinched at his own name. He mechanically reached out and clutched the briefcase to his chest like a physical shield, as if the thick leather could somehow protect him from the sheer gravity of his public execution. He turned slowly, his expensive shoes feeling like they were set in drying concrete, and let his bloodshot eyes drag across the faces of the other passengers. He desperately sought a sympathetic gaze, a fellow elite, who would silently agree that this was all a terrible, tragic overreaction. He found none. In seat 1B, the wealthy tech executive had entirely abandoned his financial newspaper. He was holding his sleek smartphone at chest level. The distinctive triple-lens camera undeniably pointed directly at Bradley, recording the entire humiliating spectacle for the world to see. A well-dressed woman in seat 3 made direct eye contact with Bradley, her lips curled in absolute disgust, and let out a sharp, derisive scoff that cut through the quiet cabin like a whip. No one looked away. No one offered a reassuring smile. They had all witnessed his unprovoked cruelty toward Chloe and his arrogant, dismissive treatment of Victoria, and they were universally, silently reveling in the spectacular downfall of a bully. I have a flight to catch," Bradley muttered, his voice a pathetic, fragmented whisper. It was a desperate, nonsensical attempt to maintain some fractured illusion of control over a narrative that had already left him behind. "I have a major merger in Seattle. I can't be delayed." "You will need to rebook with another carrier, sir," Nathan replied, stepping aside and gesturing firmly toward the open aircraft door, his arm acting as an unyielding barrier pushing Bradley forward. "Delta Airlines will be issuing a permanent ban on your profile, effective immediately. Please step off the aircraft." As Bradley shuffled forward, forced to begin his agonizingly slow walk of shame past row 2, he couldn't help but look down one last time at the woman who had single-handedly dismantled his entire life. He expected her to be watching him. He expected a gloating smile, a triumphant remark, or at least the satisfaction of her acknowledging her victory over him. But Dr. Victoria Sterling was not looking at him. She had already reopened her thick, red-tabbed regulatory dossier. She didn't look up. She didn't offer a smirk. She simply turned a heavy paper page, the faint rustle sounding deafening to Bradley's ears, her sleek silver pen resting lightly, calmly in her manicured hand. She had completely, utterly dismissed his existence. To Victoria, Bradley Covington was no longer a threat, an adversary, or even a nuisance. He was merely a closed file, a problem already solved and discarded. That absolute, chilling indifference cut deeper into his ego than any shouted insult ever could. Bradley stumbled out of the aircraft door and crossed the threshold onto the corrugated floor of the jet bridge. The cold, damp, jet fuel-scented air of the terminal hit him instantly, a harsh and violent contrast to the climate-controlled, sanitized luxury he had just been ejected from. As he walked up the steep, inclined ramp, the heavy reality of his isolation began to set in. The gate agents, alerted by Captain Miller's direct radio call, stood waiting at the top of the bridge, with their arms crossed, their faces locked into masks of stern, unforgiving disapproval. There would be no groveling apologies accepted here. There would be no VIP lounge access for him tonight. There would be no priority rebooking. Suddenly, a sharp vibration erupted from the breast pocket of his jacket. Then another. Then a rapid, relentless barrage of notifications that felt like rapid gunfire against his chest. He pulled his smartphone out, his thumbs shaking so violently he failed to unlock the screen on the first 3 attempts. When the screen finally illuminated, it revealed a catastrophic cascade of digital doom. Message from Richard. Brad, where are you? The FAA just contacted our legal department. They are seizing the manifest logs for the last 6 months. What did you do? Message from Richard. The stock is plunging in, after hours trading. The rumor mill is saying we lost our federal clearance. Call me now. Email from Board of Directors. Emergency meeting convened. 8 p.m. Est. Mandatory attendance. Bradley's breath hitched in his throat, a sharp, ragged sound. He stumbled backward near the very top of the jet bridge, his shoulders hitting the cold metal wall. He leaned heavily against it, gasping for air, as if the oxygen had been siphoned from the terminal. His chest was impossibly tight, his vision swimming with dark spots as the glowing words on his screen blurred into a sickening reality. He had strutted onto Flight 405 as a king, convinced that the world bent to his will. He was walking off a broken man, a catastrophic liability to his own life's work. And as he trudged out into the chaotic, blindingly bright and crowded concourse of Terminal 4, surrounded by thousands of ordinary people who had no idea they were watching a titan fall, the undeniable, agonizing truth finally hit him with the blunt force trauma of a freight train. No one had plotted against him. No one had set him up. He had done this entirely, spectacularly, to himself. The heavy, definitive thud of the forward aircraft door sealing shut was the loudest sound in the first-class cabin, yet it was immediately followed by a profound, collective exhale that seemed to physically alter the air pressure. The suffocating, toxic gravity that Bradley Covington had dragged aboard Flight 405 vanished the moment he was expelled onto the jet bridge. In its place, the soothing, rhythmic hum of the Boeing 757's auxiliary power unit filled the silence, a mechanical heartbeat restoring order to the chaos. In the forward galley, Chloe leaned against the metal counter for a brief, shuddering second. The adrenaline that had kept her spine straight and her professional smile locked in place was finally receding, leaving her knees weak and her hands trembling slightly. She took a deep, steadying breath, smoothed down her uniform skirt, and prepared a fresh tray. She approached Row 2 with a renewed sense of purpose, carrying a glass of sparkling water over ice and a small, warmed porcelain dish of mixed nuts. As she stopped beside seat 2A, she looked down at the woman who had effortlessly shielded her from a corporate giant's wrath. "Dr. Sterling," Chloe said softly, her voice barely rising above the hum of the engines. She placed the items precisely on Victoria's tray table. She hesitated, the strict boundaries of passenger-crew interaction momentarily blurring. I just wanted to thank you for stepping in, We are trained to de-escalate, but usually, when it comes to passengers with that much money or status, we just have to take the abuse to protect the airline's bottom line. Victoria finally looked up from the dense pages of her red-tab dossier. The severe, clinical expression she had weaponized against Bradley softened entirely, melting into a genuinely warm, deeply empathetic smile. She saw the lingering stress in the young woman's eyes and understood the heavy emotional toll of frontline service. "You never have to just take it, Chloe," Victoria said, her tone carrying the gentle but unyielding weight of a mentor. "You and Nathan are highly trained aviation professionals. You are responsible for the safety, security, and evacuation of hundreds of lives at 30,000 feet. Your dignity is not a complimentary amenity included in the price of their first-class ticket. You handled yourself with immense grace under intense, unfair pressure. Do not ever let anyone make you feel small in your own cabin." Chloe's eyes welled with sudden, grateful tears. She blinked them back rapidly, her smile widening into something entirely genuine. "Thank you, ma'am. Truly." A moment later, Nathan walked briskly down the aisle, performing his final safety checks. He paused beside row 2, his posture immaculately straight, and offered Victoria a crisp, deeply respectful nod. "Captain Miller says we have final clearance from the tower, Dr. Sterling," Nathan announced, a quiet note of triumph in his voice. "We'll be wheels up in 5 minutes. We're tracking smooth air all the way to Los Angeles." "Excellent work today, Nathan." "Thank you," Victoria replied, settling comfortably back into the plush leather of her window seat. As the heavy aircraft finally pushed back from the gate, the tech executive in 1B caught Victoria's eye and offered a slow, silent nod of absolute respect. Outside the window, the rain-slicked tarmac blurred past. The immediate, localized drama of Flight 405 had concluded, but the shockwaves of that 20-minute encounter were just beginning to gather speed across the country. 72 hours later, the weather in Los Angeles was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Victoria sat in her sunlit, meticulously organized field office, the distant roar of jets taking off from LAX providing a familiar, comforting background noise. Spread across her mahogany desk were the preliminary reports from the National Aviation Oversight Board's Code Red compliance hold. The true depth of the karma Bradley had invoked was finally materializing into hard, undeniable data. When Victoria had initiated the system-wide grounding, it wasn't merely a temporary inconvenience for Covington Global Freight. It was the equivalent of shining a massive, high-wattage floodlight into the darkest corners of their corporate basement. The forensic auditors Victoria had unleashed teams of relentless, detail-oriented federal investigators didn't just find an arrogant executive with a penchant for extortion. They found a systemic, illegal, and highly dangerous effort to artificially inflate profit margins. Desperate to undercut competitors and maintain his lavish lifestyle, Bradley Covington had authorized a shadow policy. His logistics teams had been intentionally, routinely mislabeling heavy, highly combustible, Class 3 hazardous materials as standard, inert commercial freight. By falsifying these manifests, Covington bypassed expensive safety packaging regulations, specialized handling fees, and mandatory federal reporting, loading volatile cargo directly into the bellies of passenger airliners. It was the ultimate, devastating irony, a poetic justice so sharp it bordered on fiction. If Bradley Covington had simply taken his assigned seat in 2B, swallowed his unfounded prejudices, and ignored the quiet black woman sitting next to him, his company's illegal, corner-cutting practices might have remained hidden in the shadows for years. His own unchecked ego, his desperate need to assert dominance over someone he deemed beneath him, had actively handed the head of the Federal Oversight Board the exact thread she needed to pull to unravel his entire criminal enterprise. By Wednesday morning, the corporate bloodbath was public. The board of directors at Covington Global Freight, facing imminent federal indictments, astronomical fines, and a mass exodus of terrified clients, convened an emergency press conference. Looking pale and deeply shaken, the board chairman announced the immediate, unceremonious termination of Bradley Covington as chief executive officer for cause. Bradley was stripped of his title, his access, and his power. His massive portfolio of stock shares was frozen indefinitely, pending the federal criminal investigation. In the span of a single weekend, his name had transformed from a symbol of industry dominance to a cautionary tale of spectacular, self-destructive corporate hubris. He had traded his empire for a window seat he didn't even get to sit in. Victoria took a slow sip of her black coffee, her eyes scanning the tablet resting on her desk. The morning headline from a major financial outlet read, "Logistics Giant Ousts CEO Amidst Staggering Federal Safety Audit and Extortion Allegations." She didn't gloat. There was no triumphant fist pump or self-satisfied smirk. To Victoria, this was simply the necessary, mechanical functioning of a system designed to protect people. She filed the digital report into a secure federal database, archiving Bradley Covington into the permanent record of her agency's victories. She set her coffee mug down, picked up her silver pen, and reached for the next thick, red-tab dossier on her desk. The skies were measurably safer today. The line between unhinged entitlement and absolute authority had been firmly, permanently drawn. And there was always more work to be done. We've all witnessed that breathtaking moment of unearned entitlement when someone believes their bank account or status gives them permission to treat others like stepping stones. Bradley Covington thought he was untouchable, existing in a bubble where his demands were law and his prejudices were justified. But true power doesn't need to scream, belittle, or snap its fingers at flight attendants. True power sits quietly in seat 2A, holding a federal badge and an unwavering moral compass. This story is a powerful reminder that the universe has a phenomenal sense of humor, and karma often wears a tailored suit and refuses to give up her window seat. If this story of absolute, undeniable karma hitting back hard made your day, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves seeing entitled bullies get the reality check of a lifetime, and make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss out on more incredible, real-life drama stories.